planes down an Iraqi MiG and knock out an armored column. And in Washington, tight security tonight for the President's State of the Union speech.
This is NBC Nightly News with Tom Brokaw. Tonight, America at war.
Good evening. As we approach the end of week 2 of Operation Desert Storm, the war remains mostly a one-way street, with the United States and its allies carrying the battle night and day to Iraq and Kuwait, while Saddam Hussein talks boldly but barely fights back so far. Tonight, NBC's Arthur Kent is in Saudi Arabia with details of a dramatic Allied airstrike, and Fred Francis at the Pentagon on the Iran angle. Arthur, we begin with you.
Tom, an Iraqi tank column was smashed by Marine Harrier attack planes just last night, just north of Saudi Arabia's border with Kuwait. Now, Pentagon sources tell us the Iraqis were trying to creep across the Saudi border to attack Allied forces when they were intercepted. 24 tanks and other armored vehicles were destroyed, Allied troops, and at least one reporter reported seeing flames rising after the attack. And elsewhere in the Gulf today, other successes by Allied forces.
The U.S. Navy says that A-6 intruders like these knocked out 2 Iraqi Silkworm missile batteries today. The missiles at Fa are said to have been targeted at Allied ships in the Persian Gulf. Over Iraq and Kuwait as well, Allied aircraft like these Marine Fa-18 Hornets are also flying hard. Fatigue among air and ground crew is becoming more marked now, but pilots say the missions are anything but routine.
I'm scared every time I go up there. I know they're going to be shooting at me, but I know I have a job to do.
Hours later, a safe return. On this mission, little resistance.
Every time I get back here safely, it feels good.
These Marine pilots are concentrating on Saddam Hussein's elite army units.
Yeah, we're bombing Republic of Guard this morning, up in northwestern Kuwait.
Our intent is not to go up there to dismay anybody. Our intent is to go up there and kill them.
The pilots are targeting tanks, troop concentrations, and command centers. Anything, they say, that might threaten U.S. and Allied ground forces. They are scoring solid hits, they say, but admit they don't know exactly how much damage they are doing.
Now, while Allied air crews continue to pound Saddam Hussein's army, Saudi, American, and British naval helicopters struck out at 7 Iraqi patrol boats in the Gulf today. So anti-Iraqi forces are racking up successes, but so far no one's predicting just when that might add up to victory. Tom?
Thank you, Arthur Kent in Saudi Arabia tonight. And Pentagon officials now think that they do have some of the answers on the flight of almost 100 Iraqi planes to Iran, about a third of them warplanes. NBC's Fred Francis has been following that story at the Pentagon. He's there now. Fred?
Tom, the Pentagon has finally decided, it's given its view on why Iraq's premier combat airplanes fled the war to Iran. But it isn't sure why Iran agreed to give the jets safe haven.
Military sources tell NBC News that early last week, Iraq began losing large numbers of aircraft it thought were safely sheltered by heavily constructed bunkers of concrete, sand, and steel. That was confirmed today by Lieutenant General Thomas Kelly.
Our program of bombing airfields was turning out to be successful. It's my belief that originally the Iraqis may have believed that the aircraft shelters would protect their first-line aircraft in Iraq, and they found out that that was not the case, that we are bombing the aircraft shelters and destroying the aircraft inside.
Pentagon sources say F-111 bombers and stealth fighters led the systematic attack on each hardened aircraft bunker. The mission was expected to last weeks. But the Air Force learned early that precise use of 2,000-pound laser-guided bombs could pierce the shelters and destroy the aircraft inside. The early results on both the above-ground hardened shelters and the large underground bunkers encouraged the Air Force to step up the attacks and apparently forced the Iraqis to flee to Iran.
And I don't know whether Hussein ordered it. I don't know whether it was something that the Iraqi Air Force decided they wanted to do. I don't know what the discussions have been between Iraq and Iran. I simply don't know. I do know that their combat forces are electing to leave the field, and that is, in my view, a sign of weakness.
Iraq has also tried to save its long-range Su-24 bombers, but the Pentagon said today only some had escaped to Iran. And while survival is the reason behind the exodus, no one is sure what's in it for Iran's leaders. Today, Iran promised once again it had grounded the Iraqi aircraft.
Clearly, Iran is the winner no matter what happens. It can decide to keep the planes if it chooses, or it can demand a handsome storage fee. Tom?
Thank you, Fred. And when George Bush goes to Capitol Hill tonight to deliver his State of the Union address, he'll be wearing two hats. He'll be reporting to the country as president and also as commander-in-chief. NBC's John Cochran is at the White House now. John, what's the preview?
Tom, the president will say that America faces two challenges, a war and a faltering economy. And Bush will say that America will prevail on both counts. As the president outlined tonight's State of the Union address to his cabinet, Bush's advisors worried that the nation sees him as an effective war president, but not so effective in domestic affairs. An NBC News Wall Street Journal poll in December asked, is Bush better at foreign or domestic policy? 47% said foreign policy, 23% said domestic policy. Now, with Bush concentrating on the war, the White House fears domestic policy will be exploited by Democrats like pollster Harrison Hickman.
We have domestic problems that have to be met, and if the president's going to spend 95% of his time on foreign policy, it falls to the Democrats to deal with it.
Bush will counter tonight with his plans for domestic improvements, economic growth incentives like capital gains tax cuts, banking reforms, a promise to devise a national energy strategy soon, an improved highway network, health programs including a plan to reduce infant mortality, housing and education programs. All this, the White House hopes, will show Bush is a domestic president, even though today he devoted much time to the Gulf Coalition, meeting the Dutch foreign minister and the foreign minister from Egypt, where anti-war demonstrations have intensified. In Egypt, as in some other Muslim nations like the Sudan, the war against Iraq is not universally popular, a big concern for George Bush. Another concern, the treatment of Allied POWs. Late today, the Iraqi chargé was summoned to the State Department, which again demanded that Red Cross officials be permitted to see POWs. And no big surprise here, when the White House was inviting foreign diplomats to the president's State of the Union address tonight, the Iraqi diplomat was not on the invitation list. Tom?
Thank you, John Cochran. NBC News will have coverage of the President's State of the Union speech and the Democratic response beginning tonight at 9 Eastern Time. And I'll be back in a moment with more on America at War here on Nightly News. President Bush tonight will be addressing a Congress that is united in its wish for the war's successful end, but divided by the realities of partisan politics. NBC's Andrea Mitchell is on Capitol Hill now, where the battle lines are already drawn. Andrea, what is the mood up there tonight?
Tom, it will be the first wartime State of the Union address in a generation. Congress is getting ready, nervously.
Nervous about terrorism. The Capitol is wrapped in the tightest security and memory, including new sensors to detect explosives. Even one of the congressional leaders' cars was checked for possible bombs. And nervous about political strategy. How can Democrats compete with an extraordinarily popular wartime president? By trying to remind people that the country still has problems at home.
We have a crisis abroad in the Gulf. We also have a crisis here at home. We're in a recession, and we must deal with that.
In the Democratic response tonight, Mitchell will say, as critical as the Gulf conflict is, the other business of the nation won't wait. That is becoming the Democrats' theme.
The untold story in Washington these days is that the Bush administration had no domestic agenda the day before Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, and it will have no domestic agenda the day after Saddam Hussein is driven out of Kuwait.
The Democrats have a domestic agenda, including better education, child welfare, health care.
We want to make sure that when those men and women come back from the Gulf, those men and women who are fighting for American values, one of those values is to have good quality health care.
But with Desert Storm costing an average of $500 million a day, there will be little left for new programs. Democrats say the country still has to try.
I believe that we can be frugal, that we can be sensible, and still refocus on our domestic needs.
But House Speaker Foley conceded today that big new domestic programs will not be possible with the war underway. And with the deficit growing, neither will any big spending to jolt the economy out of the recession. Tom?
Thank you, Andrea. Well, politics aside, what is the bottom line for the whole country? We asked our chief financial correspondent, Mike Jensen, to sum up for us tonight.
It is not in very good shape. First, there's the recession. Some are calling it Saddam's recession, blaming him, saying the economy would still be expanding if he hadn't invaded Kuwait. That sent oil prices skyrocketing and gave consumers the chills.
I think it's pretty bad. I mean, I just know a lot of people that are having a hard time.
There are big problems. The S&L bailout, the federal budget deficit, it's mushrooming, partly because of war costs, up to $60 billion for 3 months. That's not quite as ominous as it sounds because other countries have promised to pay $45 billion. So the cost to the U.S. would be $15 billion. Also, losses of military hardware haven't been as big as expected, and most of the weaponry is from inventory. That keeps costs down. Of course, it also means no boom for defense contractors. What next? Well, bear in mind that economists are notoriously wrong in their predictions. Not because they're dumb, but because unexpected things happen. Right now, there are 2 schools of thought. First, the apocalyptic theory. America burdened with debt, government, corporate, and personal. The banking system shaky, insurance companies fragile. So a deep recession, maybe even a depression. The other theory is much more benign. We've seen the worst. Inflation under control. Business inventories lean. Companies have done most of their laying off. So the recession ends in a few months. Which school is right? The truth probably lies in the middle. Unless there's another shock like the war lasting a lot longer than expected, or a turn for the worse in the Soviet Union, another Cold War. The point is, economic forecasting depends on political events, and those are hard to foresee. For now, America has a low-grade fever, but we don't know whether that fever can be knocked out by a couple of aspirin or whether it will turn into pneumonia. Mike Jensen, NBC News, New York.
The stock market had a healthy day today. The Dow was up in moderate trading. So far, America has fought this Gulf War pretty much at arm's length, using long-range weapons and high technology to keep casualties down. This is modern warfare. But as NBC's Mike Betcher in Saudi Arabia reminds us tonight, soldiers still fall under enemy fire. Mike?
Good evening, Tom. The history of any war is divided by the various landmarks of the conflict. This week, a new chapter of Operation Desert Storm was opened.
The name of Clarence Dean Connor was written first on a list that will only grow longer as this war progresses. Connor, a Navy medical corpsman attached to a frontline Marine unit, became this war's first recipient of the Purple Heart. He was wounded by the shrapnel of an exploding Iraqi artillery shell.
All I heard was a whistle and then a wham, wham, wham. And when I heard the first one, it happened just so quick. I put my head up, I felt something go wham again, or I heard something. I felt something hit me in the back and I hit the ground. Before they gave me the morphine, I was in pretty much, I dug 2 holes with my feet, shaking my feet back and forth, trying to deal with the pain. And then
before he left home, Connor told his family that he wanted to win a medal. He did, the hard way.
When you fight for your country and you get something, like your country's giving you something back for getting hurt while you were doing it. And I think it really means a lot to me getting this. I feel kind of special now.
Just how many more names of wounded will follow Clarence Connors will depend on the U.S. war strategy, their survival on how quickly they can be evacuated from the front. Field hospitals are receiving primarily accident victims during this stage of the war.
What kind of water is this?
However, if Allied troops are ordered to launch a frontal assault through minefields, artillery fire, and possibly even poison gas, the military's capacity to treat thousands of sudden casualties will be severely tested.
They'd have to live for 15, 20, 30 minutes, maybe an hour before whatever was bleeding was finally sewed up. And that's something everybody has to face.
They pulled this
Clarence
out.
Connor, according to a Navy spokesman, waited 2.5 hours to be evacuated from the front. Flying conditions were said to be too dangerous at the time. If the ground war begins, the danger can only grow, as will the number of Purple Hearts.
Military medical experts say that the chance of survival for American combat veterans has improved very little since the Vietnam War. New medical advancements, they say, simply have very little application on the battlefield. Tom?
Thank you, Michael. When we come back, what life is like as a human shield. Iraq claimed an Allied prisoner of war was being held as a human shield was killed during an attack last night on Baghdad. He was not identified. American civilians and other foreigners, of course, were held as human shields before the war started. And as NBC's Jim Cummins reports now, for many of them, the terror has not gone away.
This time you have to remember, we were in the desert out here.
Since his release in December, oil worker Gary Carr has been telling school children about the horror of being a human shield in Saddam Hussein's Iraq.
You look around, you got a 12-foot fence topped with razor wire. You've got guards over 150 yards or so with 30 caliber submachine guns. I'm not going to try and go anywhere on my own.
Carr was held first at a chemical plant and then at a hydroelectric dam in Iraq. He was not surprised to hear the Iraqi government claim a POW was killed while being used as a human shield during an air attack. But Carr says he and the other human shields always figured Saddam would use that as an excuse for any of them who died during the war.
The one thing that we all talked about was the possibility that if we didn't get it in an attack, that they may decide just to go ahead and shoot us so they could have a body count and then say that the bombing or whatever did this.
Business executive Richard Iliff says it is also possible a POW died during an air raid. Iliff says in the first pictures of the Allied attack on Baghdad, he recognized the gas refinery where he was a human shield. It was blown up.
Boy, I'm sure glad I'm not there. I really am, because that would have been history. And I'm sure that refinery is history.
Iliff says this is a terrible situation, but he believes the Allied bombing of Iraq should continue despite the threat to POWs. The first group of hostages suffered great hardships. Gary Carr lost 38 pounds because of anxiety and deprivation. Today there was a memorial service for Robert Vinton, another former human shield in Iraq. He died of a heart attack this past weekend after being home only 6 weeks. Jim Cummins, NBC News, Dallas.
For his part, Saddam Hussein had a message for the American people today in his interview with CNN. He said, "We wish none of their sons to die." He added that the Iraqi people are grateful for American and European demonstrations against the war. And in his commentary tonight, John Chancellor has some thoughts on how Saddam Hussein is able to get his message out of Iraq.
Tom? There's some old technology being used in this war. The B-52 bomber, which was first used in 1952. They've been modified a lot, but the B-52 is such an old model that the grandfathers of today's B-52 pilots might have flown them. And there's new technology in this war. It is called CNN, the Cable News Network. CNN reaches 101 different countries. It is the only day and night cable television news service seen all over the world. That's why CNN was allowed to stay in Baghdad when other news organizations were banned. The reason is technology. CNN's reporter in Baghdad is Peter Arnett, one of the very best. But with all respect to my friend Peter, it's not his blue eyes or repertorial skills that make him important to the government of Iraq. It's because he has communications gear that can beam a signal out to the world. Someday in this war, Saddam Hussein may have to say something important on short notice to an international audience. Maybe something like, "I surrender." NBC News can't help him with that, nor the BBC, nor the Associated Press. CNN is watched in the White House and the Kremlin and many other world capitals. For Saddam's purposes, it is better than Iraqi state radio, which can be jammed. That's why he allows CNN to stay in Baghdad under censorship, doing an honest job. War, the man said, is a continuation of political relations by other means. Saddam Hussein has found a way to continue political relations during this war. He has found CNN. Tom?
Thank you, John. And we do want to remind you tonight that all of our reports from Saudi Arabia are cleared by U.S. military censors, and in Israel, our reports are cleared by Israeli military censors. Far at least, the damage and the deaths from the Iraqi Scuds have been minimal. Those missiles have lost time and again to the American Patriot missiles. But for the children of Israel, that is small comfort. NBC's Martin Fletcher.
What 11-year-old Roy doesn't understand is why anyone would want to blow up his home.
I'm scared to walk in the street because if there's an attack, I won't have anywhere to hide and I'll die.
Psychologists are helping Roy and other children whose homes have been hit by missiles cope with the stress of terror. You don't need to speak Hebrew to understand.
וגם זה הפטריות. זה הטיל הסקאד מכיוון עיראק. וכאן נמצא סדאם חוסיין.
Basically what they need right now is someone to help them contain their fears. They are mad, they are full of anger, they want to kill Saddam Hussein. It's what every normal child would feel after such a trauma.
The children saw this, and heard this, and escaped this. Now the wounds need to heal, but every night they fear it could happen again. Shelley is 13 years old.
I remember when the missile fell, and now every noise scared me. You don't feel like you are alive. You feel like you are living in fear.
Each child in Israel is told to carry a gas mask all the time in a brown box.
It's boring, so I decorated mine.
Pink, purple, people, all to relieve the pressure, to make the unthinkable bearable. Other children from Tel Aviv whose homes have survived. What am I? Asked the teacher. A bird? A plane? I'm an air raid siren. It's the face of war in Israel, and the teacher tells the children, tomorrow is Tu B'Shvat, when Israelis celebrate nature. We plant trees, and you must be strong too, and not be moved, like a tree. Martin Fletcher, NBC News, Tel Aviv.
And of course, what we are unable to show you are the other most innocent victims of this war, the children of Kuwait and of Iraq. That's Nightly News up to the minute. We'll continue on many of these stations in a moment, and NBC News will have around-the-clock coverage of America at war on this NBC station.